I want to start by saying thank you. You guys recently had a little Super Bowl celebration, raised some funds for campus ministry, which is awesome. So we're grateful because of your partnership in campus ministry, reaching college students on campus. We're able to minister to between 500 and 1,000 college students every year on 13 campuses. So it's a big deal, and you guys play a really important part in that. So thank you. I'm so excited for that. Just to give you a little bit what that fundraiser, well, how many of you know what the fundraiser I was talking about? All right, good. We're pretty aware of that. Awesome. What you guys did was you provided money to make it easier for college students to go on retreats. So the lower the price we can make for the retreat, the easier it is for college students to come. And we have these 2 retreats, one in the fall, one in the winter. And it's a tremendous time to get away from studies, to get away from college, and just spend a weekend focused on God together. And it's just amazing to see how God works in college students, even just through that one weekend. We just had a retreat a couple weekends ago, and it was a tremendous time looking at studying the rest that God wants to provide and what it means to live in grace. The fact that we're not just saved by faith, but we're saved by grace, but we're sustained by grace as well. And it was a good time, and we had 11 students were baptized that weekend. So it was pretty good. So thank you. Baptizing people is one of the things that we do. I think we've probably baptized around 45 students this year, but we're also involved in discipling students, helping them take the next steps in their relationship with Jesus. One cool thing that's happening this year is that we've just started a new campus ministry at Oakland University. Has anyone heard of Oakland University? It's not terribly far from here. You just go east for a ways, and it's in Oakland County. And it's a university with 16,000 college students. And just a tremendous opportunity to reach people for Jesus there. So that's new this year, and it's going. We've got a Bible study. We've got a worship night. We brought 6 students to the retreat. It's just exciting to see how God's moving on those college campuses. Just a little bit of background too. His house is on now 13 college campuses in Michigan, everywhere from Michigan Tech in the far western UP, which is where I spent 20 years, and all the way down on the southeast side, you've got Eastern Michigan University and a lot of state universities in between. Our goal in campus ministry is really pretty simple. Make disciples. Jesus, at the end of Matthew, he says to his disciples, he says, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. This is what we're doing at his house. We're making disciples, and we're also working on making disciples who make disciples. One of the funnest things you can experience in campus ministry is seeing the students whom you have discipled then turn around and disciple other students. One example of that was at U of M this last couple years ago. We met a student named Grace. And she was not a believer at the time, but she was looking and she was searching, and we found her and encouraged her, and we got the privilege of baptizing her into Christ, which was awesome. Then she turned around and she had a friend named Selma, who grew up Muslim in the U.S., and Selma was also very receptive to the gospel, and Grace shared the gospel with Selma, who then also was baptized. And as you can imagine, that's a hard thing, coming from a Muslim family, living as a follower of Christ. And that's still a big question mark in her mind, but that didn't stop her from sharing the gospel with her friend, Patrick, who was from China, who was then baptized the next summer. And so when you get to see something like that, it's so much fun. And that's our ideal, what we want to see happen in campus ministry, making disciples who make disciples. And we really have this goal of having every student who graduates from his house. They're actually graduating from other universities, but we got to claim a little bit of credit too. And they graduate as alumni from his house, and then they go on making disciples for the rest of their lives. So that's our goal. So that's just a little bit about his house. I'll be available after the service this morning if you want to ask questions or talk to me in any way. I want to also make sure we are talking about God's Word this morning, and so I've got something to present to you about God's kingdom values. And it's something I've been thinking about and excited about. Thinking about and having been excited about, excuse me. Did any one of you grow up wanting to be someone great? I did, right? You know, you look around and you see these people and they become your heroes. And some of the heroes are real people. Some of them are like, you want to be like Spider-Man or something like that. Some of them are fictional, but we all look out at other people, whether they're people that we personally know, whether they're people who are just popular in the world, and we think, I want to be like that. Can you relate to that? We all do that. I think God's wired us for that, and I think it's a really good thing. The question is really, who are those heroes that we have? So sometimes heroes are famous people, right? There are athletes. I don't know, we have people that everybody knows, like everybody knows Steph Curry and LeBron James, right? Basketball players, famous for being really good at basketball. We have actors whom we see on TV and in movies that are famous as well. We have politicians, and their names get used all over the place. And so we have people, those can be our heroes. Sometimes our heroes are successful people, and we've all heard of people like Steve Jobs and Warren Buffett and just people who've just done really well for themselves. And that's an easy thing to want for ourselves, right? Does anyone want to be successful? And in whatever we do, we want to be one of those people who are successful. So we look at that and we like success. We look at talented people. People who have some skills. You might even within the body here, you see somebody who stands out in something that they're able to do, and we can look up to them. You can look up to smart people. I don't know, for some reason that was always an attraction in my family. We just liked smart people. We also liked funny people. Some of my heroes growing up were my two uncles. They were just funny guys. They just knew how to tell a joke, and they knew how to do that. And one thing I learned by watching them is if you're funny, people will listen to you. My attempt has been awkward. Awkward is a different kind of funny. That one doesn't get you as far as being actually funny, just so you know. But I wanted to be like them, and it was just clear that if you could be funny and you weren't going to be rude or disrespectful, then you had a voice. And I got to say, I whether I like it or not, I adopted that into my own life, and I saw that that's what my children wanted to be as well. They just desperately wanted to be funny. And if you could be funny, you could be heard, right? And so they took this value that we had, and they want to be funny. I remember Becky, my wife, saying, you have to earn the right to be funny. She's also a teacher, and something she would tell her students, you want to be funny, but you need to earn the right to be funny because you need to do it in the right way. It turns out, actually, there's people that we literally looked up to. Tall people. Right? We look up to tall people. As it turns out, I read there's been a study that I ran across that actually tall people are more likely to be successful for whatever reason. It's just a little strange. It doesn't seem like tall would have anything to do with your ability to do anything except for get things off of the top shelf, help people to the grocery store. But we actually know of somebody from the Bible who actually got his position because he was tall. You guys remember the first king of Israel, King Saul? He was tall, he was handsome, and they picked him. And what kind of king did he make? 2 thumbs down. That was bad. He did not make a great king. Turns out we've also had, I also read, do you guys know anything about Warren G. Harding? Like, he was a president, right? And nobody remembers him because he wasn't in our lifetime. And apparently, that was the good thing that he did. He was president. And we don't really remember much else. But it turns out the reason he was chosen to run for president is because he was a tall man, he was attractive, and he was able to speak clearly. those are not enough to make one a good president, I think. Anyways, we look up to people, and we make them often as our leaders, and we look at them and we try and emulate them and copy them. They can be historical people. They can be fictional people. They can be far off or they can be near. We admire something about our heroes, and we want to copy that. I remember reading about missionaries in the past, a guy named Hudson Taylor, who went to China on faith, and he had no idea what he was doing, but he just went, and he just desired to serve people, and just fun to read his biography. We often want to become like our heroes. What I remember is I was a student at Michigan State University, and I got involved with His House as a student. I was involved for 4 or 5 years there. And what I remember is I remember really looking up to the campus ministers. There were to me, they were these great men, these great people who were living for Jesus, and they were on campus making disciples. And I just really wanted to I just loved being around them. I wanted to be like them. I never really thought I would be like them, but I just thought that would be amazing. And to me, it just ended up being such a privilege to be able to join them on staff. But they were always like up here, and I was down here. That was just kind of what I saw. So we have our heroes, people we look up to, and one interesting thing too that happens about heroes and people we look up to is that we develop these common heroes as a community. We have people that we give status to, people that we collectively look up to. You want an extreme example of that, you can take a look at like the United States as a community. It's a very big community, but there's some people who are really, really famous in the United States. And one of the people who's been really, really famous recently is Taylor Swift, right? Everybody knows who Taylor Swift is, right? And, she's and now everyone knows her boyfriend too, because he's a football player that Taylor Swift is dating. And so what was interesting about that is that if you were watching any of the games of the Kansas City Chiefs, or you watched the Super Bowl, you had to the cameras had to make sure they went and found Taylor Swift and videoed her, even though she had nothing to do with the football game at all. Right? And because of that, they also thought, well, if we're going to show Taylor Swift, we got to show her boyfriend. Now, he was playing football, which is good, but they even focused on him more than was necessary as well. And that's just kind of the thing that we do. We assign status to people, and then we just have to focus on them when we can't escape it. Because the media people who are got the cameras, they're thinking, well, what do people want to see? Well, they want to see Taylor Swift. And they show Taylor Swift, and which means people want to see that even more. So kind of it builds this cycle. So what am I saying there? We assign people status, and we do that as a community as well. But we don't do things like we have a hard time as a community celebrating what is ordinary. Right? How many of you say, I'm an ordinary person? That's kind of how we see ourselves, ordinary person. Is anyone going to give you an award for being an ordinary person? Is someone going to come up with a camera and a microphone and say, could you tell me what it's like to be ordinary? You're so ordinary. I just really want to hear about it. That's not how that works. And so I'm pointing out we have these values in our society, and what we really want is we want to be extraordinary. You can imagine a TV report that went and just interviewed ordinary people. Would that be a TV show that you would want to watch? No. Hey, how you doing? Oh, what's your name? I'm Frank. Well, what do you do? Well, I sit around and I watch TV. Wow, good. Could you tell us how you do that? Because we want to do that better ourselves. We elevate what is extraordinary. Another thing about heroes is they're quite complex as well. We ignore aspects of people that we don't value. So when you think about Jesus, you probably think about some of his attributes, right? Something that you think is really cool. Just a couple of you be loud and tell me, what are some of the things about Jesus you would want to copy? His love, his healing, his comfort, Humility. Yes. Perfection. Ooh, I want to be perfect like Jesus. Yes, absolutely. Good. So each of us, when we look at Jesus, we see something. We hopefully see many things that are worth copying. One interesting thing that I didn't expect anyone to say. It was a little bit of a gotcha. These are things that the apostles really valued about Jesus. So Philippians chapter 3. Which I'm not going to talk about Philippians chapter 3, but at the end when I'm done here, that would be a great passage to go home and read and meditate on because it's really focused on the same thing. This is what Paul says. He says, where do I start here? I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection. That sounds good. And I want to share his sufferings, becoming like him in his death. Isn't that kind of a funny thing? He says, I want to suffer like Jesus. I want to become like him in his death. That's something that they saw that Jesus did that they wanted to copy. Is that something we see about Jesus and we want to copy? No, that does not sound good at all. And Paul goes on to say that by any means possible, I may attain the resurrection from the dead, because he wanted to suffer like Jesus because he knew that God would be faithful to raise him up. Another passage is 1 Peter chapter 2, 21. And he says, to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. Do you guys remember? There's a book written many, many, many years ago called In His Steps, and it's actually inspired a movement of bracelets that said, what would Jesus do? Remember those bracelets, what would Jesus do, or those phrases, right? We just think, what would Jesus do in this situation? Well, it comes from this passage, and because Peter's lifting up Jesus as an example. And what is the biggest thing about Jesus that he wants to lift up? It's that he suffered. It's that he suffered. It's like we want to become like him in his suffering. That is an unusual thing to want to become like. So what I'm pointing out here is that when we look at people and look at examples, we have complex examples, and we sometimes don't see the whole picture. And when we're looking at Jesus, I think we do want to see the whole picture. We want to become like him in every way, and that's just an unusual one. So let me just wrap up this idea about heroes. This is probably obvious. We have to be careful about what we admire and what we emulate, what it is that we want to copy, right? We have to be careful about that because what this does, it subconsciously directs our lives. When we have someone or some attribute that someone has that we really want to be like, it's going to affect how we make our decisions. Like if we just think, man, Warren Buffett was such a successful businessman, that's what I want for my life. Then we're going to make decisions that go after that. And so we have to be careful who our heroes are and what it is that we're after. Just thinking too, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. What you value, well, then your heart is going to follow after that. So we got to be careful. Okay. So we want to look at what it is that we value. What should we value in the kingdom of God? What is important in the kingdom of heaven? So let's look at Matthew 18, and this is a good passage to turn to if you got a Bible. Matthew 18, 1 through 4. And of course, we're in the Gospels, we're in Matthew, so we're looking at Jesus and looking at some of the interactions that he had with his disciples. So this is Matthew chapter 18. We've already been through 17 chapters. His disciples have learned a lot about Jesus. They've learned a lot about the kingdom of heaven. Jesus has been talking about this kingdom of heaven since chapter 4. It's been his topic from then on. And the disciples have a question. So at that time, the disciples came to Jesus saying, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Well, actually, that's kind of a funny question because there's actually a really obvious answer. What's the answer? Jesus, right? He is the king in the kingdom of heaven. He obviously is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So it has an obvious answer, but they're looking for something a little bit more. And by the way, we tend to get on the disciples like, oh, come on, guys, haven't you figured this out by now? But it really is an important question. It's not just who is greatest in the kingdom of heaven, but what is greatness in the kingdom of heaven? And they're looking to figure out what that is. So Jesus called to him a child. He put him in the midst of them and said, truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So they asked about who's greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus responded by saying, well, actually, we need to worry about entering into the kingdom of heaven first. Like just even being there is a big deal. And he says you need to turn and become like children. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. He says the answer to greatness is to humble yourself. The answer to greatness is to become lowly. The answer is to become insignificant. And you might even go back a little bit and say, the answer is to become ordinary. The answer is to become small. If you want to be great, work towards smallness. Knowing Jesus as we do, we're not surprised by this because we know the kingdom values are backwards. They're different than what the world values. Instead of aspiring to become like Warren Buffett, we aspire to, be ordinary and give all our money away. To be not successful in that way. One of the things this teaches us, thinking back about heroes, is what is it that we should value in others? What is it that we should look up to in other people? Right? If these values are important, this humility, this humbleness is important, then when we look around at the people that we know, we want to look at the people who have that quality. Does that make sense? We want to look at people who have that humility, and we want to become like that. Those are the people I think Jesus wants to lay out as our heroes. And Jesus did that, right? Who did he lay out as the hero for the disciples? A child. He said, look at this child. Look at this child. This is what you need to turn and become like. So this is radical and backwards teaching for sure. Let's look at Matthew 20. This is a similar thing going on, except instead of the disciples, it involves the mom of the sons of Zebedee. So the sons of Zebedee are James and John. They're two of the people who are closest to Jesus. So Peter, James, and John hung out with Jesus all the time, and all the rest of the disciples hung out with Jesus most of the time. There's a summary. James and John actually did get a nickname. And I don't know if you guys remember what their nickname was. Sons of Thunder. Yes, Sons of Thunder. And if there's actually, if you want like Bible trivia, it's Boanerges, which is what shows up in Mark. They're the Sons of Thunder. And they do things like, hey, Jesus, can we call down fire on the Samaritan village and watch it burn? So they're an interesting pair. Okay, so the mother, this is Matthew chapter 20, starting in verse 20. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee, making her Zebedee's wife, just to clear, came up to Jesus with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him for something. And he said to her, what do you want? She said to him, say that these two sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your kingdom. That's a pretty small ask, right? Sure, why not? Let's rule the universe together. You're on my right, you're on my left. No problem, we can do that. Jesus' answer, he said, you don't know what you're asking. We get that. And then he asked an interesting question. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink? Are you able to drink that cup? Now, that doesn't really mean a lot. We just imagine like, well, there's a cup over there. I can control it over and I can pour it down, right? Yep, I can do that. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about the cup of wrath, the cup of suffering. And so what he's really asking is like, are you able to suffer in the way that I'm going to suffer? Because that is actually how greatness happens in the kingdom. Jesus, one of the key characteristic of Jesus that qualifies him to be king in this upside-down kingdom is by suffering and by dying. And he says, look, if you're going to be great, you're going to have to join me in that. And they said to him, we are able. And Jesus probably chuckled and went, yeah, okay. He said to them, you will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and my left hand is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father. And when the 10 heard it, they were indignant at the two brothers. But Jesus called them to him and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. If you want to be great, you're not going to be ruling over other people in the kingdom of heaven. It's not how it works. That's how the world works, but that's not how the kingdom of heaven works. It works like this. If you want to be great, you must become a servant. You must become lowly. It's like those TV shows where you had this CEO that went and then worked in the mailroom or something like that, right? Well, the thing is, in the kingdom, the mailroom actually is the top. The mailroom is where it's at. To be a servant is the greatest thing in the kingdom. And Jesus emphasized that because did Jesus become king? Did he live as a king while he was on earth? No. In fact, if you recall, John chapter 6, a bunch of people, they got fed, 5,000 of them got fed miraculously. It was amazing. And they're like, Jesus, you need to be our king. And Jesus ran away. No, this is not what's happening. I'm not going to be king in that way. I'm not going to exercise authority. I'm not going to rule over people. The way I'm going to become king is to suffer and to die, because that is the basis of the kingdom. Jesus, in doing that, I think he is establishing what this kingdom is built on. It's built on radical service. It's built on humility. It's built on lowness. Interesting piece about this as well. He says, whoever's great must be your servant. And I don't know, for some reason I decided to do a little bit of Greek word lookup. And the Greek word is diakonos, which is where we get our word deacon from, which is something. Do we have deacons in this church? Yeah, okay. And the word deacon is just the Greek word for servant. Turns out one of the translations, older translations of that word into English is minister. Minister. Minister means servant. In fact, it comes from Latin, and the root word for minister is actually minus. Minus is the minimum, minimal. Those are all related words to minister. So the original idea behind the word minister was one who is less than. One who serves. And I think that's one of the reasons why historically that word has been chosen to be one who leads in the kingdom is not one who exercises authority, but one who serves, one who makes himself a less for the benefit of others. So if these are our values, you can pretty clearly see that our significance, our importance, our value doesn't come from what we do. It doesn't come from what role we play. This child that Jesus lays out has done probably nothing of significance. He says this is what greatness looks like. Because our value, our significance, our importance in the kingdom comes from one place. It comes from God. When he created Adam and Eve, when he created mankind in the beginning, he said, this is the image of God. You cannot up your game from image of God. There's no greater than image of God. It is already at its maximum greatness. Our value, our significance, our importance comes from the fact that we are made in God's image, that we reflect him, and we cannot improve upon that. So that's important. Well, let me offer another biblical example of someone I think lived this out well. You guys heard of Barnabas? Like Barnabas, right? Did Barnabas write any books? Not that we know of. Did he preach any sermons? Again, not that we know of. He did, actually, but we don't have those written down. Barnabas is a pretty minor figure in the New Testament. But let me tell you his story. If you go to Acts chapter 4, at the end of that chapter, it talks about a guy named Joseph who was a Levite from Cyprus. So Joseph, it's a Jew from Cyprus. He was with the apostles in Jerusalem. And what he did was he sold a plot of land and gave all of the money to the disciples and said, hey, do whatever you want with this because I know people need it. In doing so, he not only was losing the land, but he was losing all of the profit from the land. Because if you have land, what you do with it is you farm it. You use it every year so that it produces income for you. So he's not just giving up the land, he's giving up future income. And he said, doesn't matter, it's all for you. Now, turns out Ananias and Sapphira, another famous couple, infamous couple maybe, in chapter 5, they saw this and they went, oh man, yeah, I kind of want that. Because you know what happened to Barnabas after he gave that big gift? The apostles celebrated him. They said, this is good. And they even gave him a nickname. How many of you would love to have a nickname from the apostles? That's a big deal, right? I don't even care if it's doofus. If the apostles give it to me, I'm all in, right? But his nickname means son of encouragement. Just he exemplified encouragement. And Ananias and Sapphira, they saw that and they're like, oh, I want to be like that as well. But you know what? I still like money. And so well, let's pretend to be like that. It turns out it didn't work out well, and they died. It's that's a good way to end a story, right? It's the end there. They died. Okay, later on, after Saul, who later became Paul, who was persecuting the church, he was a bad guy. He first came to Christ, and he came to Jerusalem, and everyone's like, we don't really want anything to do with you, Saul, because you might be in cahoots still with the Jewish leaders and want to arrest us and put us in prison. But Barnabas said, no, I'm going to step in here. I'm going to put my reputation on the line for Saul. I'm going to be there with him. I'm going to bring him along with me. I'm going to make sure everyone knows that you can be safe with Saul. So he put himself on the line for Saul's sake because he saw something good there. Later on, the apostles needed someone to go up to Antioch and check out what was going on up there. It was cool things. There were Gentiles and there were Jews and they were worshiping Jesus together. It was so good. And they sent Barnabas up there to do that. And you know what Barnabas did? Because Barnabas could have walked in, like, all right, guys, I'm in charge here. This is how this is going to work. One of the things he did was he went up there and he was like, I need help. And he looked around and tried to remember. It's like, oh, there was that guy named Saul. He's not too far from here. Let's go find him. And so he goes off and he finds Saul, and together they lead this church together. Such an example of humility and recognizing that he needed help. And then later, when they go on their first missionary journey together, Saul and Barnabas, who become Paul and Barnabas, it's interesting in Acts, when they first set off, it's Barnabas and Saul. And usually the first person in the pair is the one who has the greater honor or significance. So Barnabas and Saul. It doesn't take very long before it turns into Paul and Barnabas, where Paul is the one who's doing all the talking. Paul is the one who is the speaker, and Barnabas is his sidekick, which is kind of how we think of him now, right? Barnabas, that was Paul's sidekick, right? Didn't start out that way. But Barnabas just lived that example of just being low, being whatever he needed to be without seeking any kind of status at all. And he might even be embarrassed that his name's in the Bible now. I don't know. I just think he exemplified that really well. Of course, our other premier example is the obvious one. That's Jesus. We've already talked about him as well. There is only one king in the kingdom of heaven. right? There is only one king. He is the head of the church, Colossians tells us. He's the one who rules over all of us. But he doesn't do that with command and control authority. You do this, you do this, you do this. He leads from the bottom. He serves. He gave his life as a ransom. That's the foundation for the kingdom. And he became the king through suffering and death. And that is our example. If you want to be great in the kingdom, be a servant. And it's not like if you become a servant, then you actually become a king. No, if you become a servant, you become a servant. That is actually how you live your life. It's that simple. But that is taking this kingdom value and owning it. Interesting thing, if you make yourself low, nobody can take anything from you. Right? If you make yourself low, there's nothing to fear from other people. There's nothing to be insecure about if you make yourself low, because you make yourself low and you're trusting in Jesus to take care of whatever needs to be done there. So just kind of a fun side thing there. All right, so let me expand this idea a little bit. When we look around and we want to figure out who our heroes should be, let me offer a couple suggestions. These are other kingdom values, but I think each one of these kingdom values emphasize making ourselves low. Okay? So when we look for heroes, I think we should look for people who love. People who love, not in the way the world thinks about love, but the way Paul talks about love. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious. It does not boast. It is not rude. These are qualities of someone who values other people and lifts them up. People who love well, those should be our heroes. People who forgive. People who forgive should be our heroes, right? Certainly Jesus did that. But as we look around at the people we know and the people who are brought to our attention, people who forgive well should be our heroes. Again, making ourselves low. People who are humble. In humility, to be clear, is not making less of yourself. What do they say? Humility is not talking less of yourself. It's talking about yourself less. That's something like that. You got the idea, right? It's not about bringing ourselves down. It's actually about lifting every other person. If you have a really high opinion of yourself, good. Now just make sure everyone else you have a higher opinion of everybody else. Right? I think it's healthy to have a high opinion of yourself. You are made in the image of God, but it shouldn't be high relative to other people. If you have a high opinion of yourself, then lift everybody else up there. That's humility. We should value and have heroes, people who are graceful towards other people, people who extend blessing and favor to everyone around them. That's exactly what God did to us. We should value people who make peace. People who make peace. We should value people who encourage and strengthen, like Barnabas. We should value people who honor other people. There's a really funny verse in Romans 12 that says, outdo one another in showing honor. So he says, okay, guys, I want to have this competition, and whoever can show honor the most wins. Can you just imagine the playoff, the final event there between two people who are just trying to show honor to one another? How do you win that? Do you win it by losing? But anyhow, it's this funny competition. Like, we really want to honor and value other people and lift them up, and it's totally backwards. Those are people we need to have as our heroes. People who are generous, who take care of the people around them, see needs and do something about it, who sacrifice in order, like Barnabas is a good example of that as well. We need to value people who submit, value people who obey, value people who love what is righteous. These are the people that we need to lift up and have as our heroes. So let's just go back and to that passage in Matthew 18. And Jesus says, I want you to turn. I want you to turn and become like children. Because I think if we're honest with ourselves, each of us know some kind of change needs to happen in the way we see things in order to have these kingdom values, because they're not natural. But we need to grow in them. And so that's my challenge, I guess, and it's to myself as well. I don't say this as one who's got that figured out. But we need to turn and become like children.